The Industrial Revolution, spanning from the late 18th to the 19th century, marked a period of immense transformation in England, radically changing its economic landscape and social structures. This era was characterized by a shift from agrarian societies to urban industrial centers, as mechanization began to dominate the production process. Factories sprang up across the country, and with them, a demand for cheap, unskilled labor surged, often fulfilled by the most vulnerable members of society, children. By 1830, estimates indicated that nearly 1 million children were employed in factories, mines, and agriculture. The majority were aged between 5 and 14. In textile mills alone, children made up roughly half of the workforce. Many of these children worked as young as 6 years old, often rising before dawn and returning home long after dark. The appalling working conditions they faced were exacerbated by the lack of regulations governing labor. Long hours, typically ranging from 10 to 16 hours a day, were the norm. Young workers endured monotonous tasks such as winding threads or shoveling coal, with little to no breaks for food or rest. The environments in which child laborers toiled were often fraught with danger. Factories were typically poorly ventilated and inadequately lit, exposing workers to harmful fumes and risking their health. In coal mines, children worked in cramped conditions, navigating through dangerous passages and facing the ever-present threat of mine collapses. Reports from the time recount tragic accidents and injuries that were all too frequent. Stretchers were commonly seen carrying injured children to the surface, and many never saw their families again. Despite these grim realities, the plight of child laborers began to attract attention from various quarters of society. Social reformers and advocates began to gather evidence to highlight the detrimental effects of child labor. One significant document in this movement was the Sadler Report of 1832, which was the result of a parliamentary inquiry into the working conditions of children. It revealed shocking accounts of abuse and neglect, capturing the public's attention and igniting discussions around the need for reform. Lord Shaftesbury, a prominent social reformer and member of Parliament, emerged as a key figure in the campaign against child labor. He recognized the moral necessity of improving conditions for working children and dedicated much of his political career to this cause. Shaftesbury championed several pieces of legislation aimed at curbing child labor and improving working conditions, including the Factory Acts. The Factory Acts, a series of laws passed throughout the 19th century, progressively prohibited child labor and established regulations around working hours and conditions. The first of these, implemented in 1833, limited working hours for children and mandated factory inspections. Subsequent acts continued to build on this framework, eventually establishing minimum age requirements for child laborers and advocating for education over exploitation. These efforts would not have been possible without the courageous voices of the children themselves and the advocacy of sympathetic adults who rallied for change. The movement significantly evolved through grassroots campaigns, public petitions, and reform organizations. As more individuals became aware of the injustices faced by child laborers, they joined forces, resulting in a powerful push for reform that would alter the course of labor laws in England. The legacy of these efforts continues to resonate today, as discussions around children's rights and protection remain pertinent, echoing the concerns raised during the Victorian era amidst modern debates about youth welfare and digital safety. As awareness of the dire conditions faced by child laborers grew, grassroots movements began to take shape, laying the foundation for what would eventually become child labor laws in the United Kingdom. One of the early catalysts for change was the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, established in 1787. This group not only fought against the transatlantic slave trade, but also set a precedent for advocating labor rights, emphasizing the importance of humanitarian principles. The values of abolition transcended the immediate issue of slavery, planting the seeds for broader social reform movements, including those focused on child labor. Among the prominent figures advocating for the rights of child workers was Lord Shaftesbury, a key reformer whose efforts were instrumental in bringing attention to the plight of these young laborers. Shaftesbury, a member of the House of Lords, used his political influence to push for legislation that addressed the exploitation of children in factories and mines. He believed that society had a moral responsibility to protect its most vulnerable members. His tireless campaigns in the 1830s and 1840s eventually culminated in the passing of several significant factory acts. These laws began to set limits on the working hours of children and established minimum age requirements, marking a significant shift in labor policy. The impact of literature and detailed reporting during this time cannot be overstated. The publication of the Sadler Report in 1832, named after its author, Michael Sadler, was a pivotal moment in the fight against child labor. This comprehensive document was based on testimonies gathered from child workers themselves and revealed the harrowing realities of their daily lives. It detailed the long hours they worked, often in hazardous conditions, and the physical and psychological toll that such labor took on them. The revelations contained within the Sadler Report shocked the public and rallied support for reform. It became an essential tool for advocates like Lord Shaftesbury, providing undeniable evidence of the urgent need for change. These grassroots movements utilized various forms of advocacy to communicate their messages. Pamphlets, public meetings, and rallies became common methods for spreading awareness and garnering support. The testimonies and conditions described in these ground-level campaigns helped to galvanize public opinion against child exploitation. As more people learned about the suffering of young workers, the demand for reform grew. In the midst of these developments, changing economic and social contexts also influenced public attitudes. The Industrial Revolution had transformed not only the landscape of work, but also societal norms regarding the treatment of workers. Growing recognition of children's rights began to take root, blending with broader humanitarian concerns and altering the narrative surrounding laborers in factories. While the struggle for child labor laws in Victorian England faced significant opposition from factory owners and industrialists who benefited from cheap labor, the mounting evidence of abuse and the voices of those directly affected could not be ignored. The combined efforts of reform groups, influential advocates, and the poignant revelations in literature propelled the momentum needed for change. This evolving activism not only paved the way for the establishment of child labor laws, but also set a precedent for future movements advocating for workers' rights and social justice. Today, reflecting on this crucial phase in history illuminates ongoing debates about the welfare of children, drawing parallels to contemporary issues such as digital safety and the rights of young users in an increasingly complex digital world. In 1833, the British Parliament passed the Factory Act, a landmark piece of legislation aimed at improving conditions for child workers in factories. This act famously limited the working hours for children, mandating that children aged 9 to 13 could not work more than 8 hours a day, while those aged 14 to 18 were limited to 12 hours. The act represented a significant shift in public policy, reflecting the growing recognition of the exploitation faced by young workers during the Industrial Revolution. However, the Factory Act of 1833 was just the beginning. Subsequent legislative measures further aimed to protect children from hazardous working conditions. The Mines Act of 1842 prohibited the employment of women and children underground, recognizing the particularly dangerous environment in coal mines. This legislation followed disturbing reports of child laborers facing appalling conditions in these settings, where their small stature was exploited to perform tasks that adults could not. Additional factory acts were passed in 1844 and 1847, each building on the progress made by their predecessors. The 1844 Act extended working hour restrictions to younger children and increased the roles of factory inspectors, who were given the authority to enforce regulations and ensure compliance with labor laws. The implementation of the Factory Act of 1847, often referred to as the 10 Hours Act, further limited the working day to 10 hours for women and children in textile industries, demonstrating an ongoing commitment to reform. The establishment and empowerment of factory inspectors played a crucial role in transforming the landscape of child labor laws. Inspectors were tasked with monitoring workplaces, conducting visits, and ensuring that factory owners adhered to legislative requirements. This instituted a level of accountability and oversight previously absent, which was essential for the enforcement of the newly established laws. While these legislative milestones signaled progress, the journey toward comprehensive child labor reform was far from over. The implementation of these acts faced fierce resistance from factory owners and industrialists who were reluctant to adapt their business practices. The economic interests of the time often clashed with emerging humanitarian principles, leading to ongoing debates about the balance between economic growth and worker welfare. The grassroots movements, which had been instrumental in galvanizing support for these reforms, continued to advocate for stronger protections for child laborers. Activists organized campaigns and leveraged public sympathy to shine a light on the dire circumstances many children faced. This collective voice highlighted the urgent need for sustained vigilance against the exploitation of young workers, emphasizing that the fight for children's rights was far from complete. Ultimately, the passage and enforcement of child labor laws in Victorian England marked a significant turning point in labor rights history. These developments laid the groundwork for the modern conception of children's rights within the workforce and contributed to a broader understanding of welfare that resonates today. As contemporary society grapples with the implications of technology on youth safety and rights, such as in discussions on social media access for minors, the legacy of 19th century reform movements serves as an essential reminder of the ongoing struggle for ethical considerations in the treatment of vulnerable populations. The enactment of these early child labor laws laid the groundwork for future labor regulations, profoundly influencing children's rights in employment throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Importantly, the Factory Act of 1833 was a pivotal moment. It not only limited the working hours for children, but also initiated a public dialogue about the rights of young workers, which continued to evolve as the century progressed. The legislation spurred a series of reforms that attracted increasing public attention, particularly concerning the welfare and education of children. As the understanding of child welfare expanded, so did societal perception of child labor. Initially, the widespread acceptance of child labor was partly due to economic necessity during the Industrial Revolution. Families often relied on the income generated by children to survive. However, as more reports and first-hand accounts emerged from those who suffered under harsh factory conditions, public sentiment began to shift. Campaigners like Lord Shaftesbury championed these reforms, and public awareness of child labor's dire circumstances grew, influencing public opinion and leading to greater advocacy for children's rights. The 1878 Factory Act further broadened the scope of protections for children, signifying a significant public acknowledgement of the issue. It mandated proper conditions for young workers and established regulations that safeguarded their health and safety. Public outcry and the efforts of reformers catalyzed a collective movement for change. Notable campaigns, such as the 1842 Sadler Report, highlighted the horrendous conditions that children endured, including long hours, dangerous machinery, and inadequate ventilation. These crucial findings pushed lawmakers to confront the reality of child labor and the necessity for further reforms. As more factory inspectors took to the field, the enforcement of these laws began to slowly reshape the workplace. Factory conditions improved gradually, though the enforcement of laws varied widely. The evolution of public sentiment played a significant role in this transformation. Once the horrors of child labor became widely known, potential consumers began to demand ethical practices from the industries that served them. The burgeoning labor rights movements of the late 19th century built upon the foundation laid by early child labor advocates, creating a broader framework for advocating worker rights, including fair wages, reasonable work hours, and the elimination of hazardous working conditions. These historical changes resonate strongly in today's discussions about child rights and labor practices globally. Modern movements advocating for youth welfare highlight issues that echo those in the Victorian era. Just as children fought for their rights against oppressive labor practices in the factories of England, today's youth grapple with complex challenges regarding their safety in digital spaces. The concerns raised by families, such as those voiced by Molly Russell's father regarding the social media engagement of under 16s, draw parallel lines to earlier struggles for child protection from exploitation and harm. Moreover, ongoing labor rights movements strive to confront the contemporary realities of exploitation faced by children and young adults in various sectors, mirroring the advocacy scene in the aftermath of the Victorian era's industrial changes. These movements emphasize the necessity of extending protections and recognizing the rights of the youngest members of society in both physical and virtual spaces. Understanding the legacy of child labor laws not only honors those who fought for reform, but also challenges us to consider how far we have come and how much further we must go in ensuring that the rights of children remain a priority in every generation.